Hey, how's it going everyone? In today's video I'll be telling you all what we need to see in the next Far Cry game from Ubisoft. There's no official release date for Far Cry 7 currently. Far Cry 6 was just released like 6 months ago, so we can assume that work on the next game is in its early stages. If the series development pattern continues, we'll likely see a spin-off game reusing assets from Far Cry 6 in either 2022 or 2023, and then Far Cry 7 would come out in like 2024 or 2025. The Far Cry series of games has been repeating a lot of itself. For me, every new release is just a Far Cry 3 with better shaders and sometimes better looking graphics. If Ubisoft is planning on having a Far Cry game that would bring back the hype, they'd have to put in the effort. And by effort I mean new gameplay mechanics. I mean, sure, it's cool looking to have bigger bases that can be conquered to get XP that helps you get skills. Ubisoft has done a fairly good job at expanding the leveling system in Far Cry 6 to give it more of an RPG vibe, just like the thing that they've done with the Assassin's Creed franchise. But that's just not enough. After Far Cry 3 came out, we saw a lot of Far Cry games releasing, 3 of which were major releases and 4 spin-off games, and I'm dead serious. Except for Blood Dragon, none of those games brought anything new to the table. Ubisoft looks to be using the old "if it's not broken, don't fix it." Sure, this works with furniture and stuff, but not with games that you advertise as completely new. Far Cry 7 could actually be headed more towards the RPG model, with including a character creator where we can make our own character, because that's the only thing that's keeping it from becoming a full RPG. The next Far Cry game needs to implement new gameplay mechanics to overhaul the game, a new, more interesting background story for the protagonist as well. They also need to show off a cooler character. Jason Brody from Far Cry 3 was a fantastic character for the most part. His origin story was great for the story that the game was trying to tell. We saw him changing step by step from a rich Cali boy who was just visiting an island to a serial killer and a hero to his friends. So, for Far Cry 7 to succeed, they have to include something new. A new setting for the game where we're not limited to a couple of islands or towns. I know I'm just making no sense now, because technically I'm not specifically saying what it needs to include. Things that I think can make the game great again can be summed down to an excellent story and a lot of new gameplay mechanics. Since the game likes stealth and encourages it sometimes, they need to improvise by adding new skills that would be essential to the master stealth killer. And these things are easy to come by. Ubisoft can just buy a copy of Hitman and download Far Cry 3. Then all what they need to do is merge the two together to get the new stealth mechanics that are needed. As for the story, making a character and developing it is a great option. Almost each and every Far Cry game has its own protagonist. God of War is a great example of character development. They can give us a new game but with a character from the old Far Cry games. And by the old Far Cry games I just mean Far Cry 3. Bringing Voss back from Far Cry 3 seems inevitable. I just don't want to see Voss in a whole new setting. I would really wish that they'd go back to the tropical island setting, but with today's new technology they can make the game very immersive. This time they can have more of Voss trying to catch us, or even have the new story get a new group of people trying to take over the island, getting Voss to start fearing for his island and bring some sense back to his head. How awesome would that be? To have Voss as a character that you can play alongside with for a greater cause. I know that I sound delusional, but these ideas aren't only mine. Maybe it's just nostalgia that gets us to speak this way. Far Cry 6's numbers seem very good. The game is way better than the previous 2 releases, which were, just put simply, not up to standards. Far Cry 6, as I mentioned, seems to be going in a better direction. It clearly wants to be a more socially responsible game than its predecessors, and to its credit, it does make an effort to tackle some social issues, even if the script might stumble a bit over the reality of some of those moments. But it still feels trapped between presenting an authentic representation of Latin American culture and a gonzoed up version designed to please mainstream Western audiences. The world itself seems like a gorgeous rendition of South and Central American life, but the script sometimes relies so heavily on specific slang that it feels like it borders on caricature. Or, more egregiously, there's the cockfighting minigame that's basically Mortal Kombat with chickens. I know it's technically legal in Cuba, but yeah. And to be honest, Far Cry 6 is the strongest the series has ever been when it comes to turning fleets of trucks, helicopters, and tanks into fiery metal scrap. While it's still super satisfying to clear a checkpoint without raising an alarm or even an eyebrow, there's a very special brand of joy that comes from speeding down a highway, trashing a convoy with mounted machine guns, while blasting Ricky Martin. And the sizable arsenal Far Cry 6 puts at your disposal makes going loud an especially appealing option this time around. Platforming in the Far Cry franchise has never necessarily been a cornerstone of the Far Cry series, but I also don't remember the jumping and climbing mechanics being as finicky as they are in Far Cry 6. It's a relatively minor gripe, but while some games are very clear that you can only climb on the blue ledges, the indicators in Far Cry 6 are much less consistent. Some climbable objects are clearly marked in orange, others in blue. You can only climb these vines, but you can also mantle onto ledges that have other vines on them, but not every ledge, because some are just a hair too high and others aren't high enough. To be clear, most of the time I'm able to climb climb over boxes and onto rooftops just fine, but when I'm trying to avoid getting machine gunned to death and get stuck slamming my face into a concrete wall, it's more than a little frustrating. So, if Ubisoft is to include platforming again in the next Far Cry game, which they will, they're gonna have to do some serious changes to how it's done. Far Cry 6 had a lot going for it when first teased by Esposito in July 2020, and officially announced that month, but the series has a lot to do before changing into a lovable game. Talk about the Far Cry franchise seems to have dropped from online forums and social media platforms. All in all, sky's the limit for Ubisoft, but as I mentioned in a previous video where I talked about the popularity of Elden Ring, Ubisoft is just following the monogame stereotype where they include gameplay mechanics that just work for any open world game at the time of release, which haven't exactly changed for the past 10 years or so. In conclusion, Far Cry 6 was good and a lot better than its predecessors, but we need to see a major change in the game and its mechanics before Ubisoft can deliver an unforgettable experience. Now, this is it for today's video on what we need to see in the next Far Cry game from Ubisoft. I would love to hear your ideas on what can make the game popular again down in the comments section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, get subscribed for more daily content, and I'll see you tomorrow with a new one. Enjoy.